Well, we do have some social studies questions come in occasionally. Let's check with Luigi and see if we have any social studies questions at the moment.
Welly then. We do have a social studies question. How does a bill become a law? We need to know.
You need to know. Okay, Luigi, there's two ways. Congress would propose a bill, and then it goes to the president. If the president signs it, then it becomes law. Now, if the president were to veto this law, it goes back to Congress, and then if 2/3 of Congress were to vote yes, then it overrides the veto of the president and it becomes a law. This very rarely happens to get that many congressmen to vote yes, but it does happen.
So it sounds like a pretty tricky process to actually make something into a law.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, I know that you were going to talk to us about some civics things today. Did you want to go ahead and start that?
I'd love to. And actually, what I wanted to do is I was going to tell a story. And a couple days ago, I had a student come to me, and they said, Mr. Wall, what's up with those trees in government? And I kind of went, what? And he goes, yeah, branches of government. And I said, oh, you're not talking about trees, you're talking about the power in government. You're talking about how power is divided amongst the government. And he kind of just looked at me and he said, what? And I said, okay, you know about dictators, right? And he said to me, he thought, and he said, dictators? Well, I like ketchup with my tater tots. And I said, no, we're not talking about food. We're talking about dictators. A dictator is a person who has absolute power. They can do whatever they want, and no one can stop them, and no one can say anything to them. He said, yeah, that's like my mom. And I have to do whatever she says. And I said, no, we're not talking about families. I'm sure your mom's a great person, you have a great family, but we're not talking about families. We're talking about governments. Now, a dictator has absolute power. That means they will abuse that power, and that's going to be bad for the people. So our founding fathers, and the student interrupted me, and he said, Mr. Wall, you said we're not talking about families. And I said, okay, we're not going to talk about families, but we are talking about our founding fathers. Our founding fathers were the men who wrote the Constitution. And remember, a Constitution is simply a plan of government. So our founding fathers wanted to break the power into three different branches. There's three parts. The first branch is the legislative branch. Now that's Congress, and Congress makes the laws. And now Luigi was a student of mine, and he did very well from what I remember. So Luigi, do you remember the parts of Congress, the two houses in Congress?
I believe that's the Senate and the House. That's House of Representatives.
You're absolutely correct. And do you remember how many people are in the Senate?
I believe it's 2 from each state, so 100.
Very good. And all right, and for the bonus question, how many people are in the House of Representatives?
200 something, I don't remember.
435.
435.
But that was close. Okay, so the second branch is the executive branch. Now, that's the president. He enforces the laws. Now, if you've been following politics a little bit recently, you know, or you should know, that we've always had a male president, but in a couple years, there's a good chance we're going to have a female president. And so what the president does, I told the student, he enforces the laws. And the student was a little confused because he looked at me and said, you mean if I'm speeding, the president's going to come arrest me? No, that's not what the president does, I said. But if Congress passes a law, it is the job of the president to make sure that all the states follow it. Now, the very last branch, that's the judicial branch. That's the Supreme Court, and what they do is they decide if laws are constitutional or not. That they decide if the law goes with the Constitution, then it becomes what they call constitutional. So the student thought for a minute and said, okay, I think I got it. I got the three branches. But what's up with those checks and balances? And so I said, okay, checks and balances are a way for one branch to control another branch, to keep one branch of the government from getting too much power. Student looked at me and just kind of shook his head, and so I said, okay. If Congress passes a bill just like we were talking earlier, and the president signs a bill, then it becomes a law. But if the president doesn't like this law, he will veto the law. This is the way that the president can then check the power of Congress. And not just say, if Congress passes a law and the president likes it and he signs it, it would become a law. So what if it was against the Constitution? This would be a case where the Supreme Court checks the balances of the president and and Congress, and the Supreme Court would declare the law unconstitutional. It would not become a law. Now the student looked at me again and said, I still don't get it. I said, okay, let me give you an example. What if Congress were to pass a law, pass a bill that said there would be no more guns? Now, some people say that's a good idea because murders might go down and the number of people dying would go down. Now, if the president liked this bill, he could sign it into law, and then no one could own a gun. Now, what would happen then? The Supreme Court would step in because, according to the Second Amendment, everyone has a right to own a gun, and the Supreme Court would say that law is unconstitutional, and it would not go into effect. So I hope that explains the three branches of government and the checks and balances. As I was talking to the student, he said, yeah, I got it. I think I understand it. But he said, what's up with that Electoral college and voting for president? And the student said, do I have to vote, or do I have to go to college in order to vote? And I told him, no, you don't have to go to college to vote, but that's a story for another day. And possibly I can come back and maybe I could talk about that next time.
We would love to have you explain the Electoral College. I know that is something that is still to many adults very confusing concept. The fact that we don't actually vote the president in, the Electoral College does, and so
Correct.
We would love for you to do that.
Okay.
It's been really great having you here, and thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing some of the things for social studies, because I know Whitney and I, that's not really our expertise, and so it's really nice to hear from someone who does have a very good take on it. So thank you so much for coming in, Steve.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'd be happy to come back.
Definitely,
Okay.
for sure.
Great.